Okay, I'm back again, and here I'm going to read about George and Marina, the Duke and Duchess of Kent by Christopher Warwick. We are on chapter 10. It's a very short read, this book. It's a very good, short, easy read. You can read it at the beach this summer. You could read it at the pool. It's such a good book. It's just a little insight into the current Duke of Kent's parents and just the whole Kent family. Remember, the Duke of Kent was bestowed upon George. It was a revived dukedom from Queen Victoria's father. So it'll be interesting. It's been interesting to see, George and now Prince Edward, and then he has a son. So how this dukedom will carry on, in the modern day royalty, because they've all had jobs, so, and Prince Edward, he's getting up in years. He's like 89 years old right now. So, and he's done such a wonderful job of supporting the Queen. And now, he's recently retired. So it'll be interesting. But in this particular chapter, it is entitled Year of the Three Kings. So in Year of the Three Kings, this is when Edward VIII abdicates. It's right after George V's death, some of the events there. But, in the next couple of chapters, I will suggest just, if I'm reading all of this properly, that you pay attention to Prince George. Remember, he had such a close bond with Prince Edward, who's now the king, and I gathered that he was disappointed, but he still kept ties and a bond with his brother. Remember, his brother bailed him out. No, I wouldn't say bailed him out, stood by him. There are virtues about the current Duke of Windsor. There were some virtues about him that really inspired George, with when it came to helping and serving the poor people, and the regular people of England. So, and he picked that up and he carried that as his purpose. Since the death of Queen Mary's colorfully engaging, if maverick brother, Frank, Princess Frances of Teck, in 1910, royal wills have always been sealed and denied public scrutiny. On New Year's Day, 1936, however, one bequest from a royal will was disclosed when it emerged that Princess Victoria had left Coppins, her estate in Ivor, to her nephew, Prince George. So that's where they got it. Coppins. They got it from, oh, that's nice. Between March and June that year, considerable alterations were made to the house before the Duke and the Duchess of Kent adopted it as their country home. A curiously shaped porch was demolished together with a veranda that Princess Victoria had built so that she might enjoy the view of the lawns and the countryside beyond. Most of the original fireplaces were taken out in favor of modern replacements, while George, the keenest motorist in the family, had the existing garage pulled down and a new one featuring high-pressure hoses and air supply built to his own specifications inside the house. Once Princess Victoria's possessions had been removed, Prince George dispelled the Victorian gloom by again using delicate color schemes, light pine paneling, and bright fabrics. One of the few objects belonging to Aunt Toria that the Kents did keep up was the marble bust of Edward VII, which was allowed to remain in the entrance hall. To lighten the room still further, the Duke tackled the garden's heavy vegetation and helped fell trees that restricted the flow of natural light. While the builders and decorators were at work, George and Marina paid frequent visits to the house, and on one particular Friday In April, they were accompanied by Queen Mary, the Duke and Duchess of York, Princess Alice and her husband, Lord Athlone, Queen Mary's youngest brother, Algy, with whom they have been lunching at Royal Lodge, the York's pink stuccoed house in Windsor Great Park. Of the rooms on the ground floor, which also included a dining room to seat 14 and 2 sitting rooms, the large music room with its tall glass doors opening to the garden became the main salon. Here, George would listen to jazz records, play his Ibeck baby grand or larger Steinway, or quietly sit and read while Marina painted at her easel, set up on a dust sheet spread over the carpet. Here, also, the Kents would entertain their friends. On the evening, Noel Coward might be found at Coppin's, as might other musicians, writers, and actors such as Malcolm Sargent, Somerset Maugham, Douglas Fairbanks, and in assorted relations, including George's cousin, Dickie Mountbatten, and his wife, Edwina. Other guests include the Channons, who first visited towards the end of 1936. In his diary for 1 November, Chips Cannons wrote, "We drove down to Coppin's to call on the Kents. They may have modernized and redecorated the house with skill and success. The result is charming, and the rooms now glow with luxe and gaiety. It is entirely Prince George who has transformed it, and he now thinks of little else. We have a massive yea, and then the besotted father carried in the curly-haired, very red Prince Edward, who looks like all 4 Hanoverian Georges rolled into one." There was also times that year when the King and Mrs. Simpson drove over from Sunningdale, either for tea or cocktails, and in return, George and Marina were often entertained at Fort Belvedere. Whether it was because they were generally more open-minded and less conservative than the rest of the royals, or simply less willing to sit in judgment on others who didn't quite fit the tribal one-of-us mold. Prince George and Prince Marina rather liked Wallace Simpson. It's true that their feelings cooled for a time after the abdication, to the extent that at one point George became so angry and distressed that he said he wanted to kill Miss Simpson. See, he really was disappointed, I think, even though they liked her. It was also true that in 1937, Marina flatly refused to visit the Duke and the Duchess of Windsor, as David and Wallace had by then become when she and George were on holiday in Tyrol. Since nothing would move Marina, the Duke made a trip to Castle Wallenberg in Carinthia on his own. When he arrived, he was met by a tit-for-tat response because of Marina's snub, such that while George saw his brother, Wallace ensured he did not see her. Oh boy. But in time, the hurts passed and the wounds healed. And as Princess Alexandra told the author, her parents never again lost touch with the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. Well, I can imagine. I mean, you really have to, especially when everything was so raw at the time, after the abdication, because you've never heard of that before at that time. So, and it really was. He abdicated his duty, but at the same time, I get, that's a big job to not do without a partner. And when you read all the other royals, George had Mary. George VI had Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. the Queen Elizabeth had Prince Philip. So that's and Charles now has Camilla. So it's quite something. You do need somebody by your side to do the job. So, and then I wonder if Edward was really even up for the job in the first place. And I think that's a story to be explored. British history books record in 1936, it's the year of the Three Kings. On New Year's Day, the reign of George V had only 20 days left to run, and by 31 December, the reign of his second son and namesake, George VI, was exactly 20 days old. In between had fallen the historic 11-month reign of King Edward VIII. Court mourning for George V meant that for the first few months of the year, the Duke and Duchess of Kent were virtually free of public engagements. Privately, they had more than enough to do for the Duke. As we've seen, the refurbishment of Coppins was high on his list of priorities. For the Duchess, official inactivity meant she could fit in extra visits to her own family. Ever since their childhood, Marina and her sisters had shared an affinity that was unusual in a family dominated by women. Throughout their lives, despite the inevitable responsibilities of adulthood, marriage, and family, they were ever in constant touch, exchanging long letters, long telephone calls, and long visits. Not surprisingly, issues of motherhood had taken pride of place in the sisters' thoughts and conversations from the time Princess Olga's son, Alexander and Nicholas, were born. Now, with Wooly, the mother of Hans Beat, her first child born on January 1935, and Marina, the devoted mother of Prince Eddie, as he was called. 9 months younger than his German cousin, the three sisters had even more to talk about. It was with the children in mind that George and Marina set out for Belgrade at the beginning of April. For the past month, Prince and Princess Paul had been settling into their newly built home, an impressive Neo-Palladian mansion approached through an avenue of lime trees, which Paul named Belvedere on White Palace, or Belvedere. It was there on the 7th of April that Olga gave birth to her third and youngest child, a longed-for daughter who they named Jelizvada Elizabeth, and to whom George and Marina were to act as godparents. Though it was far too early for anyone to be certain at that stage, Marina was again pregnant, and confirmation of that fact led to a small family celebration. When she and George paid yet another holiday visit to Belgrade in June, 2 months later, Prince Paul, both as regent and as personal friend, received Marina's brother-in-law, King Edward VIII, when he paid a fleeting visit to Yugoslavia. The brevity of the king's stay that August suited Paul very well, since David had Miss Simpson in tow, and neither he nor Olga approved of the relationship that would soon cause sensation throughout the world and cause a constitutional crisis at home and in Britain. As a result of Prince Paul's attitude, the atmosphere during the royal visit was at best strained. The Duchess of Windsor recalled in her memoirs, "The meeting between the Balkan prince and the British monarch was hardly calculated to hearten their foreign office." In a Slavic style worthy of his mountain chieftain forebears, Paul led us in a wild motorcade through the countryside, scattering peasants and chickens in a flurry of blouses and feathers, curses and cackles. David had a number of comments on the excursion. One that really amused me was, "This is just about what I expected. The only thing that bothers me is that I can't figure which he cares about less, the peasants or the chickens or us." Edward VIII's courtesy call on the region of Yugoslavia preceded the now famous cruise along the Dalmatian coast, which he, Mrs. Simpson, and a handful of friends, including Lady Diana Cooper, took aboard Lady Yule's luxurious steam yacht, the Nalin. Planned as a purely private holiday, the voyage soon assumed all the trappings of an official royal progress. Everywhere they stopped, from Yugoslavia to Turkey, kings, presidents, and prime ministers turned out in force to welcome the British sovereign. At home, the king's holiday was scarcely referred to by the press. Now and then a paragraph or two might appear, but even then no mention was made of David's companion. Not until 3 December, when the press could maintain its silence no longer, did the people of Britain and the Empire learn what had been headline news and common gossip throughout Europe and America for the past 2 or 3 months. The king was in love with and intended to marry, by now, the twice divorced Wallis Simpson. Everywhere, alarm bells started to ring. Queen Mary, who had understandably, if unfairly, branded Wallis an adventuress, was more confirmed in her opinion that one divorce could seldom or never be justified, and to divorce twice on any grounds whatsoever, was unthinkable. As heir presumptive, the Duke of York was brought to the point of nervous collapse. At that point, at the thought of what he might have to take upon himself, while his wife, ever Miss Simpson's most bitter opponent, joined the chorus of establishment figures determined to vilify Wallis of some kind as an unspeakable sorceress, hell-bent on luring Edward VIII to his doom, rather than seeing the situation for what it was and blaming the king for his inherent weakness of character and lack of dedication to his role as sovereign. Of the king's family, only the Duke of Kent wondered how David, as a temporal governor of a church that forbade divorce, could actually marry a divorcee and retain his crown. How, in one of the king's own favorite expressions, did David think he would be able to get away with it? And what of Wallis? What would she become? What, as Prince George asked his brother, would she call herself? Call herself, the king replied. What do you think? The Queen of England, of course. She's going to be queen? George asked in amazement. Yes, cried the king, an empress of India, the whole bag of tricks. Not unnaturally, the king wanted Wallis to share his throne as queen consort. But when it became obvious even to him that would never be, the idea of a morganic marriage, which had been suggested to Wallis over lunch at Claridge's by Edmund Harmsworth, who was the chairman of the Newspapers Proprietors Association, was proposed, it was not something that would work. The British government would not approve, nor would the governments of the dominions. The choice became ever clearer. Either the king would have to renounce Miss Simpson, or he would have to renounce the crown. I pointed out to him, said the Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin, the position of the king's wife was different from the position of any other citizen in the country. It was part of the price which the king had to pay. His wife becomes queen, the queen becomes queen of the country, and therefore, in the choice of a queen, the voice of the people must be heard. That's a very important, the people have to support the queen. They have to approve of who the queen is, to To Baldwin's utter astonishment, the queen then replied that as his marriage had become an indispensable condition to his continued existence, he had made up his mind. I mean to abdicate to marry Mrs. Simpson. Edward VIII's decision not only stunned the government and outraged his family, it divided public opinion. On 25 November, Chips Channing confided in his diary, "The possibility of a royal marriage is still the talk of London. The Duke of Kent asked Kitty Brownlow, wife of the King's Lord-in-Waiting, Perry Brownlow, what she thought of this marriage. Kitty tried to dance out, but he insisted, 'After all, they are my relations.'" Then he made an astonishing rejoinder, "I am very discreet, as discreet as a chub safe when you've given away all the keys," Kitty retorted. Almost 2 weeks later, only 2 days before the crisis reached its inexorable climax, Channing and his wife were at a dinner party given by Lady Cunard. When Chips was summoned to the telephone afterwards, he wrote, "I recognized the Duchess of Kent's in the Duchess of Kent's voice. She asked us to go and see her, and I stole away to 3 Belgrave Square. For 2 days now, the Duke of Kent has been with his brother at the fort, never leaving him for a second and trying by every means in his power to persuade him to stay. The king told him that over 2 years ago, while he knew that he was an excellent Prince of Wales and liked his job, he nevertheless felt that he could never stick being king, as he put it. He was afraid of being a bad one. He could never tolerate the restrictions, the etiquette, the loneliness. So perhaps if this issue had not arisen, something else would have." Again, that brings me to my point. Like, maybe he wasn't up for the job. I mean, it's okay to be second in command or the Prince of Wales, but when you have the top job, that's the hard job to have. And if you don't have somebody by your side, then it's a very hard job to have. For weeks, the people of the empire, from colonial top brass to the humblest of workers, had hung on to every word from London, denouncing or defending the king, depending on where their sympathies lay. In a prophetic letter written in early December to Lord Brabourne, governor of Bombay, Rab Butler, who was then the Under-Secretary of State at the India Office, said, "I never give people my private views, but here they are. The king is congenitally a weak man, with great personal charm, publicity sense, and some cunning. He will abdicate and will be succeeded by a dull dog who will hold the declining influence of the church and whose fortunes will be linked with that of the middle class." In less than a fortnight, Butler's prophecy of abdication came to fruition. But before it did, it appears there was a moment when the accession of the dull dog, as he called it, who was Bertie, the Duke of York, was not a foregone conclusion, despite the fact that he was Edward VIII's rightful heir and next in line to the throne. In weeks that led up, first to Wallis Simpson's divorce in October, followed by the king's abdication, 6 weeks later, certain high-placed voices questioned whether the ill-prepared, retiring Duke of York, plagued as he was with a stammer and given a sudden outburst of temper, which his family called his gnashes, was the right man for the job. Indeed, he himself was panic-stricken by the thought of succeeding to the throne, and the strain of it all brought him to the point of nervous collapse. So, this was an interesting scenario, a thought that had pondered people's mind. An alternative scenario involved the crown passing over the next 4 in line of succession, which is to say, the Duke of York his daughter Elizabeth, then aged 10, and Margaret, who was aged 6, and his recently married but as yet childless brother Harry, the Duke of Gloucester, to Prince George, Duke of Kent, who was not only married but already had a son and heir. According to one extremely well-placed constitutional expert, the idea was given serious consideration. In his book, Princess Elizabeth, published with royal approval in 1947, Dermot Mora, former Fellow of All Souls College, Oxford and Arundel Herald Extraordinary, who would write the famous speech Princess Elizabeth would broadcast on her 21st birthday, as well as several authorized royal books, told his readers that if Edward VIII must cease to be king, it would be necessary for Parliament to amend the Act of Settlement in order to give effect to his decision. As the constitutional lawyers who drafted the bill did not fail to point out, if the Act of Settlement was to be changed, it did not follow automatically that the next heir would act should succeed King Edward. The new act must in effect name the new king, and in these unprecedented circumstances, it was scarcely possible for Parliament to call any successor to the vacant throne without consulting his personal wishes. It was certainly seriously considered at the time whether by agreement among the royal family the crown might not be settled on the Duke of Kent, the only one of the abdicating king's brother who at the time had a son to become Prince of Wales, and so avoid laying so heavy a future burden upon the shoulders of any woman, namely Princess Elizabeth. The possibility of such a course was debated by some men of the authority in the state who believed that it would accord with wishes of the royal persons concerned. Among the men of authority in state Dermot Mora referred to was undoubtedly Sir Horace Wilson, a high-ranking civil servant who, as special advisor to Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin, played a key role in mediating between Downing Street and Buckingham Palace during the abdication crisis. In a report now housed in the National Archives, Sir Horace prepared a note in an unattributed hand that was seen by the writer and journalist Christopher Wilson, which also lends weight to the idea that the Duke of Kent and not his elder brother was, for however long, we shall probably never know, considered as a possible king. Well, that is very interesting. The note was astonished. Christopher Wilson saw it read, suggested that Queen Mary should be appointed Queen Regent until the divorce and the abdication should be over. The idea behind the suggestion was presumably to maintain the monarchy's stability at a moment of crisis under the control of the greatly respected Queen Dowager, while providing the parties most directly concerned with the time and space in which to decide which of the outgoing monarch's brothers should succeed him. In the event, as we well know, Edward VIII was rightfully succeeded by his brother, the Duke of York. On that fateful day, 10 December 1936, as the Dukes of York, Gloucester, and Kent made their way to the king's private retreat near Virginia Water, a dank canopy fog hung over the Thames Valley. Okay, I'm going to break this up because I'm going to break this up into another part. It's a short part. It's only a couple pages, but I want to really emphasize the moment of the abdication between the brothers. So I'm going to break it up in case you want to listen to it in a shorter clip.